One night, every speed limit sign in the US was quietly replaced to become 25 miles per hour. The 45s became 25, the 70s became 25, and the neighborhoods that were 25, well, they're still 25. Thousands of crews worked in silence overnight. Nobody saw them, nobody knows who paid them, but by sunrise, the signs were real, the limit was the law, and no one was ready for what was going to happen next. A delivery driver leaves the bakery with the morning shipment and pulls onto the freeway. The first sign reads speed limit 25. He brushes it off and keeps driving. A mile later, another sign, still 25. Moments later, he notices police lights behind him as he's getting pulled over. The officer comes up to his window and tells him he was traveling 40 miles per hour over the speed limit and issues a hefty ticket with no further explanation. The driver turns on the radio.
There's been widespread confusion this morning after speed limit signs across the country were mysteriously changed to 25 miles an hour overnight.
At this point, the internet has exploded. Photos of roads everywhere, now 25 miles per hour. 6-lane roads, freeway overpasses, rural Montana highways. People are turning to social media for answers, but nobody knows what's going on. Everyone is wondering how the day will unfold, and soon they're about to find out. But they also don't realize the extent of what will happen over the next several months and years. Morning commutes have started, and the country is quickly turning into chaos. Most drivers are simply ignoring the signs and driving 30, 40, 50 miles per hour over the speed limit. People think, well, they can't pull us all over. And police don't know what to do either. Technically, everyone is breaking the law, and they've been told to enforce the law. But with millions of drivers disregarding the new speed limit, they simply don't have the capacity to enforce it. Cities have started to make official statements.
We were not informed this change. We are investigating it, but at this time, you must obey the signs, yes.
And at the same time, governments at all levels become flooded with calls and emails. State Department of Transportations and Public Works departments can't answer the phones fast enough. Police departments are issuing different interpretations in different states. Meanwhile, the one behind it is sitting and smiling. Watching the madness unfold, knowing that what looks like a disaster today might actually be the beginning of something else. Signs haven't changed back. Nobody's taken responsibility. Yet, the speed limit is still 25, everywhere. At this point, people have stopped asking why and started to ask how long is this going to last? Drivers have divided into 3 types. First, there's the rule followers. They're doing 25 and they don't care that they're getting honked at. Next is the middle ground. 25 feels a bit ridiculous, but they don't want to risk a ticket for being the fastest one on the road. And finally are the ones who are still flying down the left lane like nothing happened. They could care less about trying to follow the new law because they simply don't agree with it. As you can imagine, this divide leads to its own set of issues, especially on highways. You've got grandma in the right lane going 25, but you've got another who's furious, late, and going 70. It's like putting golf carts into a NASCAR race. As a result, this leads to a spike in crashes all across the country, overwhelming emergency services and hospitals. By now, most people have stopped freaking out about it. There's still no explanation, just 25, everywhere, still. While individuals are able to adapt their lives fairly quickly, for businesses, this is now a whole new world that's going to require rethinking everything, especially for one industry in particular. Shipping. Major retailers like Amazon start missing their 2-day delivery promises. Grocery stores face delays, leading to empty shelves and spoiled food. Behind the scenes, logistic companies scramble to rebuild a system that can work in a slower world. This change creates huge ripple effects in the entire economy, causing disruption, financial loss, and delays across the board. At the same time, companies like Google and Apple, who provide navigation data to millions of users, are scrambling to rewrite their map algorithms for how long it will now take to get between places. Conversations begin about how to adapt our infrastructure to this change, but any of these potential changes won't be implemented until later. Everyone is feeling the change at this point, but it changes dramatically depending on where you live. For those in rural areas, travel times increased significantly. Most rural places had speed limits of 55 miles per hour or higher, especially on long stretches of freeways. In some states, these speed limits went up to 75, 80, or even 85 miles per hour. For example, a 20-mile trip into town where you previously drove 60 miles per hour would have taken 20 minutes. Now, that same drive would take 48 minutes. This is almost 2.5 times longer. In suburban places, you might expect similar increases, with many suburban roads being 40 to 50 miles per hour. However, unlike rural areas, these types of roads often have several traffic signals which slow down drivers and lowers the average speed, which is actually way more important than the speed limit, as this is actually what determines how long it will take to get somewhere. Meanwhile, cities and neighborhoods already built around 25 miles per hour don't see a significant change in travel time. By the end of the first month, the country hasn't collapsed, but it is messy. The initial panic has settled, and now everyone faces the challenge of adapting their life to this change. 6 months ago, it felt like the end of the world. Today, it's starting to feel normal, sort of. You still can't go more than 25, but behaviors are beginning to change. People are beginning to walk and bike more, especially in places that you wouldn't expect them to before. Sidewalks that were once empty now have parents pushing strollers, kids riding scooters, and people just out. Biking down a wide road like this no longer feels like a death wish, and people are starting to use them. Nothing has physically changed yet, but the lower vehicle speeds have made it safer, quieter, and more inviting to use without a car. Speaking of quieter, noise levels everywhere have dropped. Suburban neighborhoods that were built next to highways no longer have the constant roar of traffic in their backyards. Outdoor dining along busy roads becomes more pleasant. Even in rural areas, the sound of a car passing in the distance is barely noticeable now. Most of that change simply comes down to speed. At higher speeds, most of the noise from a road doesn't actually come from the engine, it comes from the tire noise. And when cars are constantly accelerating, braking, or revving to merge, that adds even more to the sound. But when everything is moving slower, the noise starts to fade. It's not silent, but it's different. And for a lot of places that used to deal with road noise 24/7, that difference is hard to ignore. With the streets now quieter, slower, and more comfortable, people start showing up in different kinds of vehicles too. At first, it's subtle. You begin seeing a few more bikes here, a scooter there, but then it snowballs. And right at the center of this shift is the e-bike. E-bikes aren't new. They've been around for years. And even in the pre-25 mile per hour world, we're taking off in popularity. But they've always existed in this weird in-between space. Faster than a regular bike, but not fast enough to feel safe in traffic. Now that equation has flipped. E-bikes don't just fit in this new system, they thrive in it. You can ride at the same speed as traffic, keep pace with cars, and cruise through your commute without breaking a sweat. It's no longer seen as a workout or a lifestyle, it's just a new affordable transportation option that opens the door to entirely new types of trips for all types of people to get around. Older adults start riding again for the first time in decades. Teens who don't have licenses gain independence. People who couldn't afford a car no longer need one. E-bikes start filling in the gaps the transportation system has ignored for years. But e-bikes are just the beginning. Once people realize that 25 is the max, the vehicle market starts to shift in some interesting ways. Golf carts, which were already common in large suburban communities, start showing up in places they never had before. Neighborhood electric vehicles take it even further. These are small electric vehicles which were commonly seen as a niche vehicle for retirees in Florida golf communities or as college campus shuttles. But now they're suddenly a viable transportation option, and they're starting to show up everywhere. What previously held them back was speed. They were fast enough for neighborhoods, but never quite the real road network. But with every road at 25, now they fit in perfectly. And for the first time in decades, the average person has real options for how to get around without having to own 4,000 pounds of metal. Of course, this creates a massive disruption to the auto industry. Suddenly, most vehicles on the road were built for a world that no longer exists. A world that prioritized highway comfort, acceleration, and crash survival at 70 miles per hour. But now, that kind of car is overkill. You're not merging onto a freeway anymore, you're crawling down a street next to a cargo bike. And that's where everything starts to shift. Not just how cars look, but how they work. Most gas-powered cars were built for a system that's gone. They were optimized to run efficiently at 60 miles per hour, not 25. And when they're dropped into this new world, they stop making sense, both mechanically and economically. They're burning fuel inefficiently, idling at stoplights, struggling through low-speed traffic in a powertrain that was never built for it. Fuel economy tanks, maintenance costs rise, and drivers start asking, why am I paying more to go slower? However, electric vehicles are doing the exact opposite. Electric vehicles are better at low speeds. They don't waste energy when stopped, and they regenerate power when braking. But the biggest factor, wind resistance. At high speeds, your car is constantly fighting the air in front of it. The faster you go, the more drag you get, and it ramps up fast. But at 25 miles per hour, that drag is barely noticeable. Electric vehicles that are advertised to get 300 miles of range on the highway have been able to get 500 miles of range by driving around at 25 miles per hour. And here's where it gets interesting. If you're getting more range from less energy, you don't need a massive battery anymore. Suddenly, car companies realized they can build smaller, lighter electric vehicles with half the battery capacity and still meet people's needs. Smaller batteries mean more affordable cars, and just like that, electric vehicles stop becoming luxury items and start becoming practical, affordable tools for everyday life. In a world where everything is slower, electric vehicles don't need to prove themselves anymore. They just need to work. And in this world, they do. But that doesn't change the fact that millions of people already have gas cars, which means a lot of people are still filling up and still feeling the cost. Even in today's world, gas isn't cheap, and that's where Upside comes in. Upside is a free app that helps you earn cash back on gas, groceries, and dining, 3 things most people spend even more on in the summer. We've used it while driving around to film this video and love how simple and convenient it is to start earning. Here's how it works. Open the app, claim an offer, pay as usual with your credit or debit card, follow the quick steps in the app, and the cash back is added to your Upside balance. From there, you can transfer it straight to your bank account or even a gift card if you want. And we're talking actual cash back, no confusing points or credits. And it's not just a few places here or there are over 100,000 locations to start earning. So whether you're commuting, on a road trip, or just running errands, there's almost always an offer nearby. Top Upside earners are making as much as $300 a month. To find out how much you could earn, click the link in the description to download Upside and use code Streetcraft to get an extra 25 cents back for every gallon on your first tank of gas, or scan the QR code here to claim this offer. And thanks to Upside for sponsoring this video. 1 year in, the country starts to look different. Literally. The panic and confusion has faded, and people have adapted. But changing the built environment is just getting started. Instead of trying to move people quickly over long distances, the question has shifted to how do we bring everything closer together? Because now, distance matters more than ever. If the drive to the grocery store now takes 30 minutes instead of 15, why not just move the grocery store closer? This is when zoning begins to change. Neighborhoods that previously only allowed just homes start to bring back corner stores. Strip malls begin integrating new types of housing, and this mix allows things to become closer not only to drive to, but also to walk or bike to. It also begins to create more connected communities rather than just huge neighborhoods of houses and huge strips of retail. And this doesn't mean everyone suddenly starts living in some dense city. Instead, it's just prioritizing convenience, and this ends up happening everywhere. In fact, one of the places that unexpectedly sees a benefit from this is small-town rural communities. Rural communities would undoubtedly have some of the hardest hitting effects of the speed limit changes, with travel times dramatically increasing. But because of this, small towns and rural communities have gained the advantage of proximity, and the small businesses in those towns begin to benefit. In one town, most people did their grocery shopping at Walmart, which was previously a 20-minute drive down the highway. There was still a local grocery store in town, but people skipped it to drive to Walmart, which was bigger and cheaper. But now, that Walmart is nearly an hour away, and the local grocery store is right there. Now, that's the only convenient option, and the sales begin to reflect that. The same thing happens at the bank, and the corner store, and the diner, and all of this brings more money into the town. And these small towns that felt like they were slowly dying start to come back to life. For most people, everyday life starts to revolve more around nearby places. But some trips can't be rezoned or moved across the street. Sometimes you still need to get somewhere else entirely, like across the state or across the country. And with long distance driving no longer practical, the demand doesn't go away, it shifts, and it begins to flood the skies. The airline industry sees a surge in demand like never before. Flights are packed and airports are overwhelmed. Trips that used to be taken by car are now defaulting to planes, even for relatively short distances. But as more people try to fly, security lines become longer, ticket prices rise, and the entire process starts to feel just as inconvenient as driving. And that's when the conversation begins to shift towards something that the US has never built: high-speed rail. Because suddenly, it's something that feels a lot more logical for a lot more people. Routes all over that used to sound like political fantasies are being fast-tracked to be built over the next few years. And this is happening everywhere. For example, drives like Dallas to Houston, New York to DC, Charlotte to Atlanta, and Cincinnati to Cleveland would all take around 10 hours now. Meanwhile, high-speed rail would take around 2.5 hours. Even rural areas are pushing for connections to regional hubs. In every one of these places, the math is simple. If everyone on the road is going 25, a train going 150 doesn't just feel futuristic, it feels inevitable. And as we look to build this infrastructure, we need wide corridors, gentle curves, and long uninterrupted stretches, which is exactly what the interstate highway system already has. So as freeway travel slows down, states begin looking at those wide medians, extra lanes, and underused corridors in a new way. What if we use that space for something faster? In some places, people are looking at the medians of highways between the directions of traffic to start building rail lines. Cities that built freeways through their downtowns already have the right-of-way to connect to their cores by rail. And it works because the land is already there. The overpasses, the clearance, the environmental reviews, even the noise buffers are already in place. At this point, it's not about starting from scratch, it's about rethinking what this space was really for. But there's another major use for the interstate system that was severely disrupted with the speed limit change: shipping. And this too has caused an uptick in demand for freight rail, as logistics companies have shifted away from long-haul trucking routes to better optimize their routes. While freight rail was already being used even before the speed limit change, more companies are integrating it into their supply chain, creating a need to modernize and expand. 1 year in, the conversation is no longer if the US ever builds a robust modern rail system. Instead, it's how fast can we build it. Now the push on politicians to get it done is coming from every angle, and for once, it's working. By the end of the first year, rail projects are already being planned out with construction aimed to finish in a few years. 2 years in, the country doesn't just feel different, it is different. Not just the design, but how we function as a society. Because at this point, there are about 80,000 people who didn't end up dying on the roads. This isn't a metaphor or hypothetical, it's reality. 2 years prior, there were about 40,000 people each year who would die because of car crashes in the US. That's one death every 12 minutes, meaning someone in the US has died in a crash since you started watching this video. Crashes have been treated like a normal part of life, as a cost of being able to get around. But those crashes weren't inevitable. They were a result of speed. And so when the speed dropped, so did the deaths. And not by just a little or in some places, but everywhere. At 25 miles per hour, people have more reaction time to stop and avoid crashes. And even for the occasional crash that does happen, these crashes at 25 aren't the same ones as the one at 45. People can still walk away and go home to their families. And it's not just people either. Before the speed limit change, tens of millions of animals were killed on the road each year. But now, people have time to respond to animals in the road, and less animals are hit. Some species see population increases and have begun wandering into towns more often. And in some areas, people are now having to think about wildlife management in ways they hadn't before. It's even begun altering animal food chains. But the speed limit change isn't just affecting their food chains, it's starting to affect ours too. Slower roads have completely changed how products move around. Even with a shift towards using more freight rail, many products still need to be shipped on the road, and some things just take longer now. Shipping routes that used to take a few hours now take most of the day. Large regional distribution centers can't keep up with last-mile delivery like they used to, and grocery stores, warehouses, and shipping companies had to rethink how goods get to people and how far they really need to travel. All of these challenges have made shipping slower and more expensive, and as a result, there's been a shift towards more localized production, especially when it comes to food. Instead of relying on trucks hauling goods across the country, more grocery stores have started sourcing food from nearby farms. Restaurants are doing the same, not just because it's trendy or sustainable, but because in many cases, it's simply cheaper. Some grocery chains are opening smaller, more frequent distribution hubs. In other areas, local food co-ops and community-supported agriculture programs are gaining traction. When the national supply chain becomes slower, more expensive, and more complicated, local starts to make more sense. It's not a full replacement for national logistics, but with shipping costs up and local options more reliable, shopping habits have shifted, and many local economies are becoming more financially resilient as a result. 5 years in, the change no longer feels new. It just feels normal. Most of the systems that were thrown into chaos at the beginning, like commuting, shipping, and daily routines, have adjusted. Not everything is perfect, but most people have stopped talking about the speed limit, they've just adapted to it. However, long-term effects are starting to show up, and they're showing up everywhere. The rail projects that were planned years prior are wrapping up construction with some already in operation. They've immediately changed the way people travel, reconnecting cities faster than ever possible, even before the speed limit changed. And with the success of these initial lines, more regional lines in places that were never seriously considered before begin construction as well. A lot of shorter flights begin to disappear, and some smaller airports that immediately saw a surge in demand after the speed limit change are now empty as the demand shifts to the newly constructed passenger rail lines. At the same time, households have continued shifting towards smaller, more efficient vehicles. There are now millions more electric vehicles on the road, and the electric grid has had to adapt to accommodate. But regular cars are still common, they're just no longer the only thing on the road. What used to be streets full of SUVs and pickup trucks are now a mix of electric vehicles, compact cars, e-bikes, scooters, and neighborhood electric vehicles. Instead of everyone driving the same type of vehicle for every trip, people are using what actually fits their need. and this shift has had a noticeable impact on the environment. With less hard braking and high-speed acceleration, there's a drop in tire and brake dust on the roads. At the same time, with more people driving electric vehicles, tailpipe emissions are down, helping to improve air quality along the roads everywhere. This has led to fewer respiratory issues, especially in places that used to have high levels of traffic-related pollution. And while streets became quieter early on, the long-term effects of that change are starting to show too, including better sleep, reduced stress, and fewer noise-related health issues for people living near busy roads. Over time, quieter streets have made it easier for people to rest, concentrate, and just feel more comfortable in their homes. People are also walking and biking more than they ever used to. Not because they're trying to meet a fitness goal, but because the built environment now supports it. Being active isn't something you have to plan for anymore, it's just part of getting around. All of this has contributed to an overall improvement in both physical and mental health, and it shows up in how people live their lives. More people say they feel better, which is kind of hard to measure, but some of the biggest effects are measurable. In the 5 years since the speed limit changed, the number is now up to an estimated 200,000 lives saved. And it's not just fewer fatalities, it's fewer serious injuries, fewer ambulance calls, and fewer trips to the emergency room. Combining this with overall health improvement has caused healthcare costs to go down. But those aren't the only costs down. Auto insurance has also gone down. At 25 miles per hour, crashes still happen, but they're usually far less severe. Cars aren't getting totaled as often. There are fewer hospital bills, fewer lawsuits, and fewer big repair claims. A dented bumper at 25 miles per hour is a very different insurance payout than a rollover crash at 70. This change is reflected in a drop in premiums that makes day-to-day life more affordable for people. But the drop in crashes hasn't just affected drivers and insurance companies. It's affected entire industries built around collisions. Fewer crashes mean fewer cars in body shops. Mechanics that used to specialize in collision repairs have seen a drop in demand. Personal injury law firms that built their entire practice around car crashes are now handling fewer cases. It's not that those industries disappear entirely, but in a world where serious traffic collisions are no longer a daily guarantee, their role starts to shrink. And while that may be a loss in one part of the economy, it also reflects a system that's costing less in damage, in stress, and in lives. Emergency services and fire departments are no longer being called out to as many crash scenes, and hospitals aren't overwhelmed with trauma cases from high-speed crashes. The strain on public systems has gone down, and so have the costs. And the impact goes further into public budgets than just that. There's also an impact on the budget for maintaining the roads themselves. Slower speeds and lighter vehicles have reduced the wear and tear that cities and states used to constantly battle. Pavement lasts longer, and lane markings don't fade as fast. Some places have been able to remove traffic signals that were no longer necessary, eliminating their long-term maintenance costs. Cities that were once stuck spending the majority of their transportation budgets just struggling to maintain the basics are now finding that they can stretch their money further. Some have even used repaving projects as an opportunity to reduce lane widths, remove unnecessary lanes, or add space for bikes and pedestrians, not just for safety, but because the demand has shifted. The economy has shifted too. Walkable neighborhoods are in demand more than ever. Real estate markets have started prioritizing places where people can get around without needing to drive far. Even most new suburbs being built now are maintaining the quiet neighborhood feel, but are designed around still being walkable at the same time because the convenience is valued more than ever. But in some places, things never got convenient. While rural areas have adapted in many ways, the impact is still felt more than ever here. Many rural areas have started to advocate for a compromise. Could slight increases in speed to 35 or 40 still have some of the same safety benefits while easing some of the practical challenges? And could dangerous intersections be redesigned to slow traffic during the conflict points while still allowing higher speeds on wide open stretches? At the same time, in a lot of other places, society has adapted to this post-25 life, and they don't want to go back anymore. Because going back would undo everything that happened for the better. Parents would stop letting their kids walk or bike to school. Crossing the street would feel like a risk again, and the walk to the corner store would no longer feel worth it. People would start driving more because it feels unsafe not to, and everyone else does too. Crashes would become deadlier, sirens would return, and insurance rates would increase. Vehicles would get bulkier to protect people from the higher speeds. Traffic would be louder, air would be worse, and cities would start to fall back into the cycle of repaving and restriping to maintain a system that prioritizes speed. 5 years ago, someone changed the signs. Nobody knew who did it or why, but maybe that was the point. Because what initially looked like something that would send the country into chaos actually forced everyone to rethink how things could be different if we just slowed down.